This is George Abraham speaking. Now, in my previous video talk, I spoke about the need to cultivate a wide-ranging vocabulary. I told you that the best methods towards this was reading as much as possible, and that vocabulary building has to be done on one's own, and that it cannot be taught by teachers. Now, today I'd like to speak to you about certain other language elements that can also be learned through reading. Now, the first one is spelling. As we all know, this is something tricky. English is not a phonetic language, which means that there is no direct correlation between spelling and pronunciation. The spelling of many English words are vexing, especially words derived from other languages like French, Latin, Spanish, etc. An example is the word rendezvous. Now, going by the spelling, we pronounce it as rendezvous, when in fact it has to be pronounced rendezvous. So just see the difference between the spelling and the pronunciation. Now, how does wide reading help us with our spelling? When we see a word in print again and again, the spelling of the word gets etched in our memory. It's not by learning the spelling of each word individually that one masters the spelling. It is through constant exposure to books, newspapers, and magazines. Secondly, there is the vexatious issue of the correct preposition. We have to use the correct prepositions. Prepositions are the short words such as at, in, on, into, across, etc. that are used to express relationships between words. Now, these can be troublesome. For example, I heard the news on the radio or over the radio. It was announced on the microphone, on the mic, or over the mic. We tend to say it was announced through the mic. I heard it through the radio. That is a literal translation of our mother tongue. Our mother tongue it's called mother tongue interference. Radio il kudi ketu, mic il kudi ketu. So we tend to use the through. But in the case of a radio, television, mic, we have to use the prepositions on or over. So this can be troublesome, the use of prepositions. The legendary Professor C. A. Shepard, and I had the good fortune to be his student, he once told us that by assessing the correctness of a person's use of prepositions, that person's overall level of proficiency can be more or less accurately be gauged. By just looking at the way how correctly a person uses the prepositions, one can more or less accurately assess or gauge or evaluate that person's overall standard of English. So that's the importance of prepositions. Now, it's not possible to draw up a list of prepositions and what words they go with and learn it by heart. We can't learn by heart a long list of prepositions and the words that go with them. We pick up and internalize the suitable prepositions through reading. So this is another major thing that we can learn through wide reading, that is the correct use of prepositions. Now the same is the case with phrasal verbs and other fixed expressions, set expressions, such as wake up, throw away, run out of, to figure out, pick up, put up with, look up to, get rid of. Now they all become parts of our vocabulary. As a result of wide and constant reading, they become a part of our vocabulary. Now they too can be mastered only through constant exposure to the language. Now another language element is the collocations. What are collocations? They are certain words that go with certain other words, and only they can be used. Two words juxtaposed, they are used next to each other. They go together. They go in pairs. Now let me illustrate this with some examples. We have all heard of fast food. Fast food. But we don't speak of quick food or rapid food. Fast is the word. So we can say that fast is the word that collocates with food in this sense. In this particular sense, that is food that can be easily and quickly be prepared. Food that can be easily and quickly prepared. Of course, we can say organic food, hot food, delicious food, and other things. But in this particular sense, that is a food that is easily and quickly prepared, we use the word fast with food. Fast is the word that collocates with food. We can't say quick food or rapid food. And then we speak of heavy rain and strong winds. But we can't say, but we don't say a strong rain or heavy wind. So heavy is the word that collocates with rain, and strong is the word that collocates with wind. Similarly, we speak of doing the homework and making a phone call. We can't say make the homework or do a phone call. So do collocates with the homework and make collocates with phone call. Now, and then the opposites of words or antonyms. Antonyms or opposites of words, these two can be confusing. Now there are many prefixes that we use to form the opposite of words. The prefixes are like un, un, and then in, in, dis, dis. For example, like, dislike, and then im, im, and then x, ir, irr, irresponsible, irrevocable. Now these are all prefixes that we add to words to form antonyms. Now the other day I listened to a minister, a Kerala minister. He was saying, he said this, he was speaking in Malayalam, no meeting whatsoever, formal or informal, was held in this connection. He repeated that 2 or 3 times. Now I am not finding fault with the minister. This sort of mistake can happen to anyone, even to postgraduates of English, even seasoned teachers of English. This sort of slips of the tongue can happen. And in order to get these internalized, in order to get these prefixes assimilated in our mind or memory, we need to read quite a lot. And then post-positive adjectives. Post-positive adjectives. Now adjectives are usually used before a noun. A white horse, for example. We don't say a horse white. And then there are some adjectives that can be used both before and after the noun. Now here I am speaking of compulsory post-positive adjectives. That is, some adjectives can only be used after the noun. For example, the word galore, G-A-L-O-R-E. Galore means plenty or in large numbers. There were people galore at the meeting, or there was a food galore at the party. We can't use a galore before. We can't say galore people or galore food. They come after the noun. So they are compulsory post-positive adjectives. And then there are some words like Professor Emeritus. We don't say emeritus professor. The adjective emeritus comes after professor. And then poet laureate. We don't say laureate poet, but poet laureate. The director general, not general director, director general. Similarly, some people and their titles. For example, Henry VIII. We don't say 8th Henry. Henry VIII. And then Alexander the Great. These are all examples of some post-positive adjectives. And then the name junior and senior in some names. For example, Martin Luther King Jr., George Bush Sr. Senior and junior comes after the names, after the noun. So post-positive adjectives, these two are not taught in the classrooms. You cannot learn it from a textbook, but you learn it through constant exposure to the language. And I repeat, reading is the best form of exposure, especially when it comes to learning. So, apart from vocabulary building, spelling, prepositions, phrasal verbs, antonyms or opposites, collocations, post-positive adjectives, they can all be mastered through reading. As a result of wide reading, these language bits and chunks are internalized or assimilated unconsciously. I am certain that this is how all good speakers and writers of English have attained their level of proficiency. We have quite a good number of fluent and idiomatic speakers of English in our public domain. P. Chidambaram, Shashi Tharoor, Indra Nooyi, they are just a few. Salman Khurshid, Prakash Karat. And these people, I am quite sure that they have mastered the language only through exposure to the language. Now, most of them were brought up in urban areas, in good schools. So they were exposed to spoken English too, and they must have read quite a lot. And that's how they became proficient in the language. I don't think they have heard of terms like collocations and post-positive adjective. Shashi Tharoor, who is perhaps the finest speaker of English in India, I don't think he has heard of these terms. Collocations, post-positive adjectives. He picked them up. He internalized them, and they became fixed in his mind. But they use them correctly on account of their exposure. Now, almost all of us, we live in a non-English speaking environment, and so the only exposure to the language is the printed material that appears in front of us. Books, newspapers, magazines. The more we read, the more we pick up these language bits and chunks, as I prefer to call them, and they remain embedded in our memory, subconscious, or some other recesses of our brain. And when the occasion demands, they these bits and chunks, they spring to the tip of our tongue or the pen, as the case may be. So that's about all. One can never overemphasize the need to read a lot if you want to attain a certain degree of a certain level of proficiency in the language. So thank you for having given me a patient hearing.